Hey, what's good, nerds? Nannu here, and today I'd like to talk to you about some ethical philosophy, specifically the paradox of tolerance. First proposed by philosopher Karl Popper, aka Karl Popper. In 1945, the paradox of tolerance is something I've seen a lot of in sort of more recent political discussions online. The paradox of tolerance is basically the argument that in order to have a tolerant society, we have to be intolerant of the intolerant. And while from a consequentialist perspective, I would definitely agree with sort of the utility of this, I do think the way this is framed is a little misleading. You see, because it's my personal belief that most paradoxes stem from, either a misunderstanding, a misconstrual, or a misframing of the conflict in question. When it comes to the paradox of tolerance, it strikes me more as a problem of framing. So for example, I think a lot of people, Karl Popper, I think a lot of people, Karl Popper included, frame tolerance as exclusively like this binary system. You're either completely tolerant of everything or completely intolerant of everything. And I think that's not really a great way to frame this. I think ultimately tolerance and intolerance both kind of exist on a sliding scale spectrum, and that we need to meet certain levels of intolerance with certain levels of tolerance. So if you take your average bigoted conservative, I think to a certain level we can tolerate their expressions of intolerance, depending on the severity and stuff. But generally speaking, I think in a tolerant society, we can tolerate those kinds of bigoted opinions. But however, when you go beyond the bounds of sort of more moderate conservatism into more extreme forms of conservatism, like, for example, the ideology of Richard Spencer, for example, that I think we need to be less tolerant of. To kind of tie this into the whole meme or whatever, I think to a certain extent, while some people might have some misgivings about engaging in violence against people, doing direct incitements to violence and advocating for genocide, I actually view that as incredibly tolerant. You see, I think in a less tolerant society, somebody like Richard Spencer would be thrown in prison or, even executed. And I think there is some legit moral justification to engage in that kind of behavior. And I think it is the reflection not of an intolerant society, but of a tolerant society, that not that we give him a platform to espouse his racist and genocidal beliefs, but rather that the only real pushback that he gets is that when he is in public and espousing these, direct incitements to violence, that somebody might pop him in the mouth.
Let me play a sad song for you on the world's smallest violin.
But we can all, go a step further. Someone who shares Richard Spencer's ideology, but is in a greater position of power, I'm going to use the most obvious historical example here.
Godwin's Law.
I think it's not an intolerant society that meets that level of intolerance with swift, direct, but at the nevertheless, calculated and measured organized violence.
We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never
surrender. Now, to a certain extent, this is just sort of a semantic argument. I mean, to a certain extent, that's basically philosophy in a nutshell. But I do think framing this paradox of tolerance not as a tolerant society needing to be intolerant, but rather that a tolerant society is being tolerant by meeting this level of intolerance with a measured amount of resistance, I think is a better way to frame the whole issue. And I think it sort of neatly solves this paradox proposed by Karl Popper. But what do you think? Do I have it all wrong? Do you have a different opinion? Maybe you have a different solution to this supposed paradox. You sound off in the comments below, and if you've got an interesting enough take, I'll take a look at it. I'll give you a little comment back. But yeah, that's all I got for you today. Take it easy, and I'll catch you next time.